I discovered I was part of a secret experiment, and now I'm fighting for my freedom. Reddit stories. They say every family has its secrets, but mine was wrapped in layers so dense it took nearly 2 decades for even a corner of the truth to peel away. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand the backdrop. The kind of home I came from. My parents, outwardly, were nothing short of perfect. My mother was the nurturing type, always making sure there were fresh cookies on the counter when I got home from school, while my father had the presence of a man you respected, even feared a little. Stoic, dependable, a pillar of logic in a chaotic world. We lived in a quiet 2-story house in a sleepy suburb, the kind with seasonal decorations, backyard barbecues, and nosy neighbors who prided themselves on knowing nothing ever happened there. But something did happen, and it started with a house. Or rather, a part of it no one knew existed. I was 17 when my parents left for a week-long cruise, something they had planned for months. I wasn't invited. "You've got school," they said, and I didn't protest. I enjoyed the silence of the empty house, the freedom to raid the fridge at 2 a.m. and play video games until dawn. On the third night, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the windows, rain hammering the roof like a drumline. The power flickered and died around midnight. With nothing to do and my phone battery at 3%, I grabbed a flashlight and wandered around the house like a ghost. That's when I noticed something. In the hallway closet near the stairs, normally filled with winter jackets, there was a faint outline on the floorboards. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I realized it was a hatch. A hidden panel flush with the wood, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. My heart started beating faster. We'd lived in that house for over a decade. I knew every squeaky stair, every loose doorknob. I had never seen this before. I hesitated, hand on the cold metal ring embedded in the panel, wondering if this was even real. What kind of family hides a room under their hallway closet? After a few moments of mental back and forth, I pulled. The panel came up with a creak, revealing a short staircase that plunged into darkness. The air that rose from below was stale, dry, and smelled faintly of something chemical, like an old lab or hospital. With trembling hands, I aimed my flashlight downward and took the first step. Then another. The sound of my own breathing was deafening. The staircase was short, only 8 steps, but each one felt like a descent into some forgotten part of my family history. At the bottom was a door. Just a plain, wooden door with a tarnished brass knob. When I opened it, I found myself in a small room, about the size of a large walk-in closet. The walls were painted white, though they had yellowed with age. There was a desk in one corner, a filing cabinet, and a small cot against the far wall, like something out of a makeshift dormitory. But what stopped me cold were the photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard that covered the entire left wall. Each photo was labeled. Dated. Some had notes scribbled in the margins, and every single one was of me. Me as a baby, a toddler, a child at school, on my bike, eating ice cream. Moments I didn't even know had been photographed. Some of the pictures were clearly taken from a distance, through windows, behind fences. I turned slowly, heart now thundering in my ears. The realization settling like a stone in my stomach. Someone had been watching me my entire life. Not just watching, documenting. I rifled through the filing cabinet, each drawer more bizarre than the last. There were medical records, journals, strange diagrams of brain scans with my name written in neat capital letters. SUBT4 was written across multiple folders. There were letters too, typed reports addressed to someone named Dr. C, and signed by initials I didn't recognize. My head spun. None of this made sense. I wasn't adopted. I had baby pictures with my mom and dad. We looked alike. There was no way I wasn't their biological child, but this room suggested otherwise. Either they weren't who I thought they were or I wasn't. I took as many papers as I could carry and rushed back upstairs, slamming the hatch shut behind me like I was burying a corpse. The rest of the night I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with a baseball bat in one hand and the documents in the other, trying to piece together a reality that had just been ripped from under me. The next morning, I called my uncle, the only person on my dad's side I ever felt close to. He was a little strange, a bit of a conspiracy nut, but he always treated me like an adult. I asked him, point blank, if he knew anything about hidden rooms or surveillance. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a hushed tone, he said, "You need to get out of that house." Now? I laughed nervously, hoping he was joking. But he wasn't. "You think your parents went on vacation?" he asked. "They're not coming back. And if they do, you better pray they don't find out you've been in that room." I demanded answers, but he hung up. In the days that followed, I tried to act normal, going to school, pretending everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, because now I knew I had been for years. I examined every corner of the house, finding hidden cameras in places I never would have thought to look: behind the bathroom mirror, inside a stuffed animal, even under the lip of the kitchen counter. I ripped them all out, but for every one I destroyed, I felt like there were two I hadn't yet discovered. I began to question everything. Every family vacation, every dentist appointment. Every time my parents said, "We're doing this for your own good." What was the good they were talking about? Then, one afternoon while scanning through the documents I'd taken, I found something new. A memo labeled Termination Protocol Subject 4, dated 3 days prior. It outlined a schedule, a cruise departure, a reset plan. The last line froze the blood in my veins. Huncher deletion of all unstructured memory clusters. Initiate re-synchronization on reentry. I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't sound like a family vacation. It sounded like an erasure, like I was just a program scheduled for reboot. My friends thought I was losing it. I tried to explain what was going on, but I must have sounded insane. Who would believe their own parents were involved in something like this? I had no idea what Subject 4 meant or why I had been monitored like some lab rat. But I was about to find out. Because something was coming back, and I had just uncovered a secret they had spent my entire life trying to keep buried. The day my parents were scheduled to return, I didn't go to school. I couldn't. I sat in my room, the curtains drawn, every muscle in my body tense with anticipation. I double-checked every lock, blocked the hatch with furniture, even left my phone's camera recording the hallway. Anything to feel like I was one step ahead. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. These were the people who had watched me grow up from behind walls, who had archived my childhood like data, and I had no idea what they were truly capable of. Every sound made me jump. The creak of a tree branch, a distant car door, the wind brushing against the windows. Time slowed into syrup, every second dripping with dread. Around 5:42 p.m., the doorbell rang. Not a knock, the doorbell. That was the first sign something was wrong. My parents never rang the bell. They had keys, obviously. I crept to the staircase, heart pounding so loudly it felt like my ribs were vibrating. Through the peephole, I saw a man and woman. Not my parents. The man wore a gray suit, thin, rimmed glasses, and had an expression so blank it felt artificial. The woman stood beside him, similarly dressed, holding what looked like a leather binder. Neither of them moved after ringing the bell, just stood there, waiting, observing. Then the man spoke, not to me, to something clipped on his lapel. Subject is non-responsive, visual confirmation of environmental breach. Initiate Tier 2 engagement. I backed away from the door like it was radioactive. These people weren't salesmen or neighbors or anyone from our sleepy town. They were here for me, because of what I found. Because I went into that room, I didn't wait. I ran through the house, grabbing the duffel bag I had packed days ago with documents, USB drives, snacks, and a burner phone I'd found in the filing cabinet. I slipped out the back door and sprinted through the alley behind our house, zigzagging through yards, avoiding open streets, just like I'd mapped out in my head. I made it to the bus station 10 blocks away, breathing hard, pulse in my throat. I bought a one-way ticket to a town 3 hours north, a place I'd visited once on a school trip. Quiet, off-grid, forgettable. Exactly what I needed. On the ride there, I couldn't stop reading the files. My eyes ached from the strain, but I couldn't look away. The deeper I dug, the stranger it got. The term Subject 4 appeared again and again, always attached to my name, but rarely in isolation. There were references to Subject 1, 2, and 3. No names, no photos, just reports. Failed synchronization. Neural drift, emotional instability, termination. Whatever program I was part of, the others hadn't made it this far. And now it seemed I was next. At one point, I found a page titled Developmental Conditioning Timeline. It was a day-by-day list of events matched with Quinfluence injections, phrases, gestures, specific parental actions calibrated to shape my behavior. Things like feather feigns disapproval at age 7, drawing to reduce visual creative expression. Mother initiates bedtime story recursion protocol. Test long-term pattern recognition. My life wasn't real. Or at least it hadn't been spontaneous. It had been curated, built, maintained. I made it to the town by nightfall and checked into a cheap roadside motel with cash. The room was musty, the sheets questionable, but I didn't care. It was distance. I pushed the dresser in front of the door and sat on the floor for hours, reading, connecting dots. And then I found it, a document labeled Emergency Recall. It had my parents' names on it, real names apparently, though the surnames didn't match. They weren't even married, just two operatives paired for a long-term observation protocol. The file listed Rolos, Handler A as a motive, primary maternal model, responsible for subject emotional encoding and attachment calibration. Handler B is a cognitive primary paternal model, responsible for logical encoding, disciplinary thresholds, and system deterrence. They weren't my parents, they were actors. The document included photographs. Before I was born. My mother, with short red hair and a military uniform. My father, in a lab, surrounded by monitors. There were notes on how their dynamic was to be adjusted over time depending on my reactions. It all felt so clinical, like I was a rat in a maze and they were changing the walls to see where I'd run. I wanted to scream, cry, tear the motel room apart, but I didn't. I sat there, numb, staring at the last page in the folder, integration pending, memory partition stable. Full sequence upload scheduled 17th birthday, pause 72 hours. That was tonight. I didn't know what sequence upload meant. But if they were tracking me, if there was some kind of kill switch or memory wipe protocol coming online in a matter of hours, I had no time to waste. I needed help, but not the kind you call 911 for. So I turned to the only person who might know what was going on, my uncle. The one who told me to run. I hadn't heard from him since he hung up on me. His number was disconnected. But the documents had an address scribbled in one margin. His address before he retired. I left the motel an hour later, took another bus, and walked the final stretch to a cabin buried in the woods. The place looked deserted. Windows boarded, mailbox overflowing. But I knocked anyway. After a full minute, I heard movement. Slow, careful. A click as a lock turned. Then the door opened just a crack. And there he was. He didn't say a word. Just grabbed my arm, yanked me inside, and shut the door like the world was ending. The cabin was dark, lit only by a single oil lamp. Maps and schematics covered the walls. Old radio equipment buzzed quietly in the corner. "I told you not to go in that room," he said finally, his voice low and ragged. "I didn't even know it existed." I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What didn't you tell me?" He sighed and sat down heavily. "Because they monitor everything, or they did until now. The fact you're here means something's broken. That gives us a chance." "A chance to do what?" I asked. "To end it." Over the next hour, he explained everything, or at least everything he thought he knew. Back in the late 90s, a project was initiated under a classified directive, something called Eden Echo. The idea was to raise children in fully controlled environments, monitored from birth, to study the limits of human adaptability, emotion, memory encoding, and potential for predictive behavior modeling. Most of the early subjects failed. Either they became unstable or realized too much too soon. But a few survived the conditioning longer than expected. I was the last. Subject 4. The HOT layer. The one they thought might achieve integration. Full compliance with the fabricated environment, leading to the ability to predict and control decision-making across all major life domains. They wanted to build a person whose entire life was a loop they could run simulations on, he said. A model they could copy, scale, deploy. But why me? I asked. He looked at me with something like guilt in his eyes. Because you weren't born not in the normal way. You were grown. In vitro. Selected. Engineered. A silence. Heavy. I couldn't breathe. He continued. They picked genes for intelligence, emotional sensitivity, low aggression, high suggestibility. Then they inserted you into the family unit. Your handlers. Me. I was a glitch. I wasn't supposed to stay involved. But I did, because you smiled at me once when you were a baby. And I realized you were more than just data. He stood, pacing now. Tonight's the final protocol. If they get to you, they'll wipe everything. Start over. But if we can isolate your memory thread, extract it, we can prove what they did. How? I asked. He turned to the corner, pulled a tarp off a strange-looking device, a tangled mess of wires, monitors, and what looked like a crude MRI scanner. With this, it was insane. Every cell in my body told me to run, but I didn't. I lay down on the metal slab, staring up at the ceiling, the hum of the machine beginning to rise. Because if my whole life had been a lie, this might be the only way to take it back. Or at least, to make it mine. The last thing I remember was his voice saying, "This is going to hurt." Then everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't sure if I had woken up or if I had died. At first there was nothing but a raw, hollow silence, like I was floating inside the space between thoughts. Then sound rushed in all at once. My heart pounding, air gasping into my lungs, the cold sting of metal against my back. I was lying on the same table, but something was different. The lights were off. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. I tried to move, but my arms felt like wet sandbags. My mouth tasted like copper. Across the room, the machine still pulsed faintly, lights blinking in no pattern I recognized. My uncle was gone. No footsteps, no trace. Just gone. I called his name, my voice hoarse, barely audible. No answer. I sat up slowly, my vision spinning for a moment before it cleared. On the table beside me was a flash drive. Taped to it was a single post. It nota, don't trust what you feel. It's not all yours. That's when I realized something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. My memories, they weren't in the same order. I saw flashes of my childhood, but rearranged. Familiar moments distorted. I remembered a birthday party where I'd blown out candles on a blue cake. But now the memory played differently. The cake was red. The candles were already melted. No one was singing. And in the corner stood a man in a suit, watching, recording everything with a device that hadn't existed when I was 7. The memories kept folding in on themselves, like origami made from video clips. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Some of the strongest memories I had. My mother singing to me when I had nightmares. My dad teaching me how to ride a bike, felt staged now. They had angles, lighting. I remembered emotions, but they felt inserted, like someone had dialed them in from a control panel. And then, something worse, had new memories, ones I had never accessed before. A white room, walls lined with screens, a woman, my mother, dressed in scrubs, speaking into a headset while staring down at a crib. My crib. Subject shows high mirror neuron response to auditory affection cues, proceeding with attachment calibration. I remembered blinking, and from my crib, I watched her smile like it was part of a routine, a performance. I staggered to the cabin door, unsure if I was still inside a memory or real life. Outside, dawn was breaking. A fog had rolled in, softening the tree lane into silhouettes. The silence was eerie. No birds. No wind. Just the faint mechanical hum of something distant. Wrong for a forest. I looked at the flash drive. Whatever was on it, it was the key. I just didn't know to what. I had no laptop, no internet. I needed help. And for the first time in days, I knew who I had to find. Her name was Hannah. We'd been friends since middle school. Real friends. Or so I thought. If anyone could look me in the eye and tell me what was real, it was her. I didn't have a phone anymore, but I remembered her number. Muscle memory. I found a diner half an hour down the road and used the payphone, praying she hadn't changed it. She answered on the third ring. Hello. Hannah, it's me. I don't have time to explain, but I need to see you. Please. It's important. But she hesitated. Where are you? I gave her the address of the diner. She arrived in under an hour, hair still damp from a rushed shower, eyes puffy like she hadn't slept either. When she saw me, she froze. Not with relief, with fear. What happened to you? She whispered as we sat down. I don't know where to begin, I said, sliding the flash drive across the table. But I think this has everything. She took it, hands shaking. We drove to her place. Her parents were away for the weekend, and plugged it into her laptop. The files weren't just documents. There were videos, hundreds of them. Footage of me, from infancy to now. First steps, first words, first fights, private moments, things no one should have been able to see. But there they were, labeled and cataloged, and worse, simulations. Videos of me doing things I had never done. Robbing a store, getting into a car crash, breaking down in front of strangers. It was like watching alternate timelines. Hannah clicked through them, horrified. What is this? She asked, tears in her eyes. I think it's a model, I said slowly. A behavioral AI based on me. They were using my reactions to predict future actions. Not just mine, maybe others too. It's a feedback system. They simulate, I react, they update the model, and repeat. Over and over. She pulled up a folder marked Mirror Threads. Inside were personality matrices, charts, files labeled Projection Subject 4, age 1935, Romantic Response Curve, Ideological Drift Index. They weren't raising a child, I said. They were growing a profile, something they could copy, clone, sell. And then we found it, one final video, titled Integration Success, Subject Fork. Time-stamped 4 hours in the future. We clicked it. The video showed me, older, sharper, standing in front of a government building, shaking hands with someone I didn't recognize. A flag in the background. A press conference. I was smiling, speaking into a mic. We believe in freedom through control, in peace through order, and that starts with understanding the human mind. Not as a mystery, but as a map. I felt like I was going to vomit. That's not you, Hannah whispered. It will be, I replied, unless we stop it. She grabbed my hand. Then let's burn it down. We spent the next 6 hours copy every file, every clip, every document. She sent them to cloud drives, torrent sites, encrypted forums. Spread them like wildfire. At 6:02 p.m., the exact timestamp on the video, the lights in her house flickered. Then went out. I grabbed the laptop and the flash drive. They're coming. We fled out the back door, down the alley, into the dark. I didn't know where we were going. But I knew one thing: this wasn't about running anymore. It was about rewriting the script they had written for me. Because they made one fatal mistake. They trained me too well. They taught me to adapt, to analyze, to survive. And now, I was going off script. For the first time in my life, my decisions were mine, and I was going to make sure they couldn't predict what came next. We ran for hours, ducking through neighborhoods and alleys, staying off main roads, avoiding every camera, every store window, every suspicious van. My brain wasn't just in fight or flight. It was in full-blown analysis mode, scanning everything like the system had trained me to, only now I was using their programming against them. They had built me to obey patterns, but I'd learned to see them too, and break them. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Hannah and I reached the outskirts of the city. We'd swapped out our phones, grabbed burner SIMs, and left her laptop uploading the files in an internet cafe we never went back to. Our names were probably flagged in every facial recognition database by now. The only reason we hadn't been caught yet was because we weren't behaving like us. That's what they never accounted for. True randomness. We ended up at an abandoned train depot, long since shut down and swallowed by weeds. It had no power, no people, no signal, but it had shelter and silence. We sat on the floor of a rusted-out maintenance room, our backs against the wall, breathing heavy. Hannah's face was pale but determined. "What do we do now?" she asked. I pulled out the last file I hadn't looked at yet, the one with my name and the word Rapai Kaion stamped in red across the top. Inside, I found a list of locations, 8 of them, across the country, each labeled HOSTCD, ECO CHILD. They hadn't stopped with me. Each site had a designation, not names, numbers, probabilities, behavioral clusters. There were dates too, some old, some recent, one as recent as last month. This wasn't just a test anymore. It was a rollout. They were building a generation of perfectly modeled individuals, people they could simulate, control, predict, in government, in media, in science, anywhere they wanted influence. And I, Subject 4, was just their prototype. "We have to get to one of these places," I told her. "Find out if the others know, if they're like me or worse." She nodded. "Which one?" I pointed to a town 2 states over, a medical facility that had been decommissioned 5 years ago. But the date on the document said otherwise. This one, it's still active. The journey there wasn't smooth. We changed buses, hitched rides, even slept in an unlocked delivery van one night. But the whole time, my mind was racing. Every memory I had was being reevaluated in real time. What had been a childhood became a blueprint. I could see the manipulation now. The moments of joy, frustration, even love, interlaced with purpose, with experiments, and yet not all of it felt fake. That was the part that scared me most. Somewhere in there, something real had happened. Maybe it was the smile Hannah gave me after I cracked my first bad joke in 6th grade. Maybe it was the time my fake dad put his hand on my shoulder after a school award and looked. Truly looked. Proud. Were they just that good? Or did they slip? By the time we reached the facility, we looked like 2 travelers off the grid. Dirty, tired, but alert. The building stood on a hill behind a chain-link fence, half covered in ivy. A faded sign read, "Shady Pines Rehabilitation Center." Classic misdirection. We scaled the fence after midnight. Hannah cut her palm on the wire. I tied it with a strip from my shirt. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The building was cold inside. Lights still worked, power was on, but there were no guards, no cameras, just long, echoing hallways. We found the first signs in a basement lab: bunk beds, feeding schedules, behavioral charts written in childish handwriting, stick figures, emotion logs. One door at the end was locked. Behind it, faint humming. A soft mechanical sound. I picked the lock with a piece of wire and a stolen credit card. The door creaked open. Inside were 5 children, each in their own small enclosure. Glass walls, furnished like cozy bedrooms. They weren't restrained. They were playing, reading, drawing. Each had a tablet beside them, flashing prompts. What would you do if your friend lied to you? Rate this photo happy or scary. Watch this video. How should you respond? One girl, maybe 9 years old, turned to look at us. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second I felt it. Recognition. Not like she knew me, like she was me. A boy next to her said, "You're not supposed to be here." Calm. Flat. Almost rehearsed. Another added, "They'll be back soon." We didn't wait. We ran through the lab, grabbed whatever files we could. Printed logs, flash drives, even hard drives bolted into desks. We couldn't free the kids. The rooms were sealed tight. But we knew where they were. We made it back to the woods behind the facility before the alarms kicked in. Sirens echoed like screams in the dark. We kept running. For miles. Until my lungs burned. We found a safe place. A safe house my uncle had scribbled in code onto one of the documents. A bunker beneath an old church, lined with copper and Faraday cages. That's where we set up our base. And that's when I stopped being a subject. I became a threat. The data we pulled from the lab included program names I hadn't seen before. Project ECHO was just the beginning. There was Project FOULD, testing how many overlapping realities a mind could hold before cracking. Project SL, implanting fake memories to override trauma. Project LOSIH, measuring the effect of synthetic empathy in manufactured bonds. But the worst was Project MyRR. It wasn't about kids, it was about adults. They'd begun running simulations on real people, ordinary citizens, matching their behavior with modeled replicas like me. And once the model predicted what you'd do next, they'd manipulate your digital environment to push you that way: social media feeds, job offers, targeted news. Influence without contact, control without awareness. They were already doing it, at scale. Hannah and I built a network, quietly. Using old systems, analog backups, burner networks. We started sending out bursts of data, truth bombs, disguised as corrupted files, leaks, satire, even memes. Anything to spread awareness without getting caught. We used their own tools, algorithms, pattern triggers, a behavioral bait. They trained me to be a perfect test subject. I became the perfect saboteur. Then one night, I got a message, an unmarked email, just a single line. Subject 1 is awake. I stared at it for hours. The others, they weren't just data. Some of them remembered, some of them knew, and if we could find them, unite them, we could bring it all down. Not just one project, not just one lab, the whole system. Because we weren't copies anymore. We were corrections. It started with the flicker of a message, a digital ghost finding its way through layers of security like a pulse through a dying wire. Subject 1 is awake. That single sentence changed everything. Until then, Hannah and I thought we were fighting shadows. A war in the dark, pulling files, exposing fragments, tearing holes in the curtains of a system so vast it didn't seem like it could bleed. But that message, that meant someone else was out there. Someone like me. Someone who remembered. We didn't respond right away. Couldn't. We traced the origin. It came from a public Wi-Fi node in Detroit, piggybacked off 3 outdated proxies, and wrapped in code I recognized immediately. The formatting, the structure. It was from the same syntax they used at Eden Echo. Whoever sent it had been on the inside, or still was. Over the next few days, more signals came in, not just from Detroit, Atlanta, Sacramento, a mining town in Utah, a clinic in Luxembourg. All brief, encrypted, never more than a few lines. Each ended with a subject number. Subject 200, subject 5, subject 6. And then, finally, subject 8 offline. That one hit hard. Someone hadn't made it. But it was proof. We weren't alone. We started calling ourselves the Fractures. Not a group, not yet a rebellion. Just fragments. Pieces of a whole that never should have existed. They had tried to build human beings like puzzle boxes, pre-assembled for efficiency. But when the box cracked, we weren't empty inside. We were awake, aware, and we remembered enough to fight. Every subject came with scars. You could feel it in their words, even if their messages were short. Some had been buried in the simulation longer than I had. Others were taken out, reinserted, overwritten multiple times. But every one of us had done the same thing the moment we broke free run. Then one message came through that changed the game entirely. They're migrating the archive. Final sync in 36 hours. Facility Ironsight. That word hit me like a concussion. Ironsight. It was the master node, the digital heart of Eden Echo. The one place all our data passed through. A bunker buried beneath a defunct military base. I'd seen it mentioned once in a corrupted log, marked as black tier access only. Even my uncle hadn't dared go near it. If we could get into Ironsight, we could shut them down. Not just this generation of experiments, but the framework itself. The predictive algorithms, the child labs, the replication protocols. We could corrupt their core data, scatter it. Let the world see what they really were, farmers of identity, selling pre-written lives to the highest bidder. Hannah and I didn't hesitate. We reached out to every subject who still had a pulse on the line. 7 of us responded, the others missing. Or worse, we coordinated a rendezvous in an abandoned service tunnel outside Cheyenne, Wyoming. It felt like a cliché. The rebellion gathering in shadows. But what met us in that freezing dark was something stranger than any fiction I could have written. Every one of them, they looked familiar. Not like siblings. Not even like me. But familiar. Echoes of gestures, expressions, posture. I understood then. Each of us had been built using the same core framework, with minor deviations to test variables. Anger, tolerance, curiosity, risk, emotion. We were forks of the same identity tree. Subject 1 was the oldest, maybe 25, shaved head, sharp eyes. He didn't speak much, but his movements were efficient, practiced. He had escaped through a medical fire in a Canadian facility 5 years earlier. Since then, he'd been tracing their funding routes, building a map of the network. He knew where Ironsight was, and more importantly, how to get in. We planned for 12 hours. There wasn't time for more. Every plan came with a risk. Every route was uncertain, but we didn't have to survive, we just had to succeed. Ironsight wasn't a lab in the traditional sense. It was a data core, sealed underground, air, gap, physically separated from the internet to avoid external breaches. Inside were servers the size of trucks, AI models humming day and night, constantly updating behavioral predictions for millions of people. Not just subjects, ordinary citizens. They'd scaled the model. We were just the blueprints. To get in, we had to shut down the satellite relay station above it. Without that link, the system would try to sync locally, opening access ports inside the bunker that weren't supposed to exist anymore. Hannah and Subject 3, a girl named Rhina who spoke in riddles but hacked like a god, would handle the satellite from the surface. The rest of us would breach the lower entrance. The night before the mission, we sat in silence, each of us in our own thoughts. I kept staring at the fire we'd made, trying to find clarity in the flames. Who was I before this? Was there ever a that wasn't made? Did it matter? Hannah sat beside me. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She just said, "You're real, no matter how you were built." That was all I needed. We moved at dawn. The relay station was guarded by contractors, private security wearing military gear with blank patches, but they weren't expecting 7 ghosts. By the time they noticed anything, Reyna had scrambled their surveillance loops, and Hannah had triggered an electromagnetic burst that fried their uplink tower. Underground, the Ironsight facility roared to life, switching to backup systems, rerouting power. Exactly as planned, Subject 1 and I entered through a maintenance shaft hidden in a mountain ridge. The climb down was over 400 feet. We moved silently, bypassing old retinal scanners, thermal detectors. I still remembered the layout from that one corrupted blueprint my uncle left me. Every corner felt familiar, like walking through a forgotten dream. At the core, we found it. The hub walls of servers bathed in red emergency light. The hum of cooling fans and a central console waiting. "Plug it in," Subject 1 said. I pulled out the final tool, a virus built from their own behavioral models. Twisted backwards, instead of simulating stability, it introduced chaos. Logical loops that spiraled into nonsense. Feedback algorithms that contradicted their own predictions. It would scramble the entire framework, turn the model against itself. I pushed it into the port. The screen flickered, and suddenly faces, thousands of them. Us, every subject, every life they modeled, every test, every manipulation. One by one, the faces blinked off as the system collapsed. Outside, alarms blared. Doors unlocked. The entire bunker began to shake. They were triggering a purge. If we didn't get out, we'd be buried with it. Subject 1 stayed behind. He said it was the only way to keep the core running long enough for full corruption. I tried to argue. He just smiled and said, "That's the thing about being a copy. One of us was always going to make it." I ran. When I emerged into the sunlight, Hannah was waiting. Behind us, the mountain groaned. A rumble rolled through the air like thunder. Ironsight was gone, but the system was broken, forever. In the weeks that followed, fragments of truth leaked across the internet. Names, locations, reports. It was enough. Investigations began. Journalists dug deeper. Protests flared. And those in power who had backed Eden Echo began to vanish from headlines. We scattered after that. The fractures. Some of us went quiet. Some stayed in the fight. I don't know where Rhino is now, or Subject 6 or 1 if he somehow lived. But me? I live not as Subject 4, not as a model. as a person, a glitch in the system that refused to be rewritten. And for the first time, every move I make is my own. It's strange what silence feels like after you've lived your whole life inside noise. The noise of structure, of plans, of softly spoken scripts dressed up as love, of synthetic memories and pre-approved emotions designed to mold me into something that could be monetized, cloned, and sold like software. But in the weeks after Ironsight fell, after we set their system ablaze from the inside out, there was nothing left but quiet. And in that silence, I finally heard myself. I didn't go back to the house I'd grown up in. I couldn't. That place had never been mine. Not the bed, not the pictures on the wall, not even the name stitched onto my old backpack. It was a set, a controlled environment, a simulation wearing wallpaper and carpet. Instead, I stayed on the move, using one of the old routes my uncle had marked in the margins of his notebooks. Safe zones, fallback cabins, anonymous hostels where people didn't ask questions if you paid in cash and didn't make eye contact. Hannah and I drifted for a while. Together, then apart. We needed space. Time. She was the only real thing in a decade of artificial design, and we both feared damaging that with the weight of what we now carried. We still checked in once every few days. Never a call, just coordinates or an encrypted message. Proof of life. It was enough for now. I wasn't the only one who disappeared. The others. Subjects like Meek vanished like vapor. Raina left a final message, a digital artifact buried in the code of a corrupted health app that simply read, "We were built in boxes. Let's never live in one again." She was gone after that. Subject 6 sent a burst transmission from the edge of Romania, accompanied by surveillance footage of him burning a data vault to the ground. No words, just fire. The world didn't change overnight. Of course not. The powerful never fall loudly. They collapse in paperwork, in redacted memos and sudden retirements. Eden Echo's files began to surface on obscure forums. Journalists called it a hoax at first, then a scandal, then a conspiracy. Eventually, it was all too much to ignore. Senators began deflecting. Tech CEOs went underground. A whistleblower in Luxembourg released financial links connecting Eden Echo's shell corporations to government funding, military research, even educational software. The story broke wide. Still, most people didn't want to believe it. After all, what sane person wants to accept the possibility that their dreams, their thoughts, their behaviors have been mapped, modeled, or manipulated since childhood? Denial was the system's last defense. And it worked on a lot of them. But not everyone. Some started asking questions. Quietly. Carefully. Looking at old memories and wondering if they'd really happened the way they recalled. A few parents came forward, people who had adopted children under strange circumstances, only to be cut off from them once they asked too many questions. The truth was leaking through the cracks. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, no name, no return address. Just a single line of handwriting on the envelope, for Subject 4. Inside was a photo, not of me, of a girl. Maybe 3 years old, sitting in a sterile room with a toy robot in her lap. Her eyes were large, expressive. Too expressive. I recognized the blank walls, the soft lighting, the angles. I knew immediately it was another facility. Active, ongoing. But the back of the photo was what froze my blood. Subject 12. Integration 6-7%, emotional stability high. Recommendation Phase 2 parental simulation. Handler pair already assigned. See folder 10B. Begin memory conditioning. There were 2 words scribbled under that in pen. She's yours. I read it 5 times before my hands started shaking. Was it true? Could they have taken my DNA, used it to build another? Was Subject 12 my replica, my child, or was it bait? It didn't matter, because if they were still making more, if this nightmare had simply gone deeper than we thought, then our job wasn't done. I spent the next 2 weeks tracing where the letter had been mailed from. Postmark rural Norway. I flew under a fake name. Off-grid routes. Cash payments. I followed a chain of abandoned research outposts until I reached a forest near the coastline where a solitary weather station pulsed with faint heat signatures in the middle of winter. Cameras, drones, shielded walls, and somewhere inside, the next chapter of a lie they weren't finished telling. That's where I saw her. The girl. Through the scope of a thermal lens, behind glass. She was reading, not a tablet, an actual book. Something they probably gave her to encourage emotional anchoring. It looked like Charlotte's Web. I remembered that story. I remembered crying when the spider died. But I also remembered, in hindsight, how my handler had watched me cry. Not with concern, but with analysis, recording every tear. I couldn't let this happen again. I didn't attack, not with fire, not with fury. I did something worse. I exposed it. Using the data we'd collected, I sent a signal straight through a hidden node buried in the station's emergency uplink, coded to mimic their own archival backup pings. A Trojan. When the systems sensed for a routine check, they pulled every file I had fed into the signal, video, photo, internal chat logs. Proof of what that station was doing, directly to the inboxes of journalists, watchdog agencies, and every major political figure who had ever denied the existence of Eden Echo. They tried to shut it down, but the internet never forgets. By the end of the week, people were protesting in 5 countries. The station was stormed. By local authorities or vigilantes, I never found out. But the girl was taken out, unharmed. Her photo appeared on a human rights newsletter. She was being cared for, being unmade from the system that made her. And that was the moment I realized something: I would never be able to stop this entirely. Not alone, but I could be the shadow in their future, the flaw in their design, the reminder that control can never be complete, not when those who escape it are willing to burn it down again and again. Months passed. I stopped counting. I live on the edge now. Borders, safe houses, silence. But sometimes I sit with a burner laptop and watch the headlines. Whistleblower claims child development program, a government front, new leaks suggest global mind shaping network, another facility found, records seized. Each one is a scar I helped leave. Each one is a family saved from living a life they didn't choose. The family I had, it never existed. But I've made peace with that, because the truth I carry now, that I was never truly loved, never truly raised, never truly real to the people who made me. That truth has become my weapon, and what they created to control the world became the force that turned against them. I was never just subject for. I am the reason they failed. I am the reason they will never succeed again. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.